Hi, I'm Angela from Dance with Angela. So I'm sharing 4-part series on explaining or sharing how dance plays a part in love. And this one is about evolution of consciousness. So at this time, we're collectively going through a big wake-up time as a species. From the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of movement in the transformational growth movement, the human development movement, and self-actualization movement. There were lots of movements that were really looking at what's the future of humanity and how can we self-actualize ourselves. So part of that was through dance, and one of the major places that helped us embody some of that through evolution of consciousness through movement was Esalen in the USA. So Esalen was responsible for so many amazing teachers. One of the people who inspires me is Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, who's created amazing BMC work. So I wanted to share in this video what is the evolution of consciousness that movement can give us, and how that really helps us to look at love from a different perspective. I think a lot of us have looked at love from a very limited perspective, and we've looked at love as something that I can give or receive. But right now, our species is at this amazing tipping point where we can look at love from the next level, which maybe we haven't really experienced as a species, and that's the hardest part. But in my experience, when I've done movement work where I'm connected to a group of people, we're dancing together with this great desire to really evolve, magic happens. And I'm talking about an hour of dancing together, an hour and a half. I'm not talking about years and years and aeons of trying to get this species to wake up and jump into a new way of being. I'm talking about an hour where I've seen enormous transformation of that group of people moving and connecting together. So I've done this a lot of times, and I'm not the only one. I've watched people from the 60s and 70s doing it in their workshops, and I've been trained by some of those people. So I started to think, well, this is kind of easy. Why don't we just all get together and dance together? So we actually become that self-actualized species that learn how to love and come together as one. And after asking that question, I got a lot of answers. A lot of people don't like themselves, don't want to move. I can't dance. If I dance, then people will think this about me. People start moving their bodies, and then things sexually get aroused, or they think that that is sexual if they move. There's all these stories and stories and stories about movement and the body. However, in the other video I was talking about, when we're in utero, the first expression of that life form, which is not even a child yet, it's in utero still growing, is movement. The first sense or expression is movement. They don't have eyes, they don't have ears, they don't have taste. They're moving. They have a sense of touch, but not really. That's not even formed. But the first expression is movement. So movement is something that's very nonverbal, and it hasn't been layered by all the things that society layers it as. And in my experience, when I was in those groups, or even just by myself moving and experiencing the movement, there was an enormous shift, extremely simply, easily, gracefully, without much effort. And that was enormous for me, because it was like an instant recognition of what we really are, which is a great spirit inhabiting this physical form. Our forms are all different. That one we know. We're very fixated on how we're all different and how we're limited. But in the movement, very easily, quickly, and this was in a Sufi movement workshop in New Mexico with Adnan Sarhan, I saw my spiritual energy. And it wasn't just seeing with my eyes. It wasn't like I had lights flashing or anything. It was very heart. It was an exquisite knowing of my spiritual energy. And I didn't have any judgment. I didn't have anything else except love and connection. That would be another word. So when you experience that, that can be quite overwhelming. And I've seen people do it in dance classes. They experience their true selves and they just start to think, what's that? Who is that? And then they run away. Completely normal. I had another reaction. My reaction when I first experienced it was tears. So some people, they just really, really think they've touched God or something, but they think God's something else out there. It's not, it's in us, but we still don't know how to accept that as a species. And we still think that that's arrogance. No, you're just seeing a light and an aspect of God. And when people cry because they feel that love, that's actually the first real connection, the point where you're really starting to get, oh, I am this physical person in a body, but there's this enormous aspect of myself that perhaps I've been denying, avoiding, or perhaps ignorant of. And the tears come because you're actually just making that connection. I've always looked at the picture of Da Vinci with Adam reaching the fingers to God and thought, that's the moment. The moment you're like, it's not that you are God, you are different, but there's this synapse connection. The heart connects to this enormous aspect of yourself where you're overwhelmed because it's so enormous, annoying and enormous. Well, it's annoying that you maybe haven't been acknowledging that part of yourself. And in the movement, we have this enormous opportunity to embody that greater aspect of ourselves. So let me just review where a lot of the transformational movement that started in the 60s, the humanist movement, that a lot of psychologists, they took Jung's work and really started to take it to the next level of how we're going to take this to a collective experience. Their vision for humanity was oneness. Everybody acknowledges who they are within, and we all come together and celebrate that. And that was enormous, that vision that they had for humanity. Unfortunately, at the time, there were a lot of other substances being consumed and a lot of other people that wanted the generations that were looking for real change to be not making change politically. And they wanted to keep the things the way they were. That hasn't really changed. But what has changed is that internally, there's more people on the planet now aware of that internal connection to an enormous power within, the divine within. So what happened with the groups that were working with movement to create that collective experience of that, there was a lot of amazing work that was done. Then we evolved into the dance party scene, raves started. Then, of course, some substances came in and other agendas started to take over. But what's happened as a stepping stone for our consciousness is that we've constantly been reunited through movement as a way, as a collective, to celebrate that we're not just this limited human who's going to constantly choose the wrong things for humanity. But actually, internally, we're actually enormously powerful. And when we come together and honor that, we're even more powerful. So I think Mardi Gras in Brazil is a great example of the creativity of how they can get a show on the road that is so celebratory and so big, and they celebrate that feeling of that enormous gift of humanity to be amazing. And there's other parts of Mardi Gras that are less, they're a bit more on the other side of life as well. But that's all part of it. It's really celebrating. We're not all angels. We're not all meant to be perfect. We're real, but we have together this enormous capacity to evolve. So our ability to evolve consciousness through movement has been one of the most consistent things when you look at cultures historically. Dance and moving together has always been a part of the culture, which at times was subversive to the culture, but in other cultures, it was central to the culture. I'm in Australia, and our Indigenous culture here, dance and movement were central to the way that they celebrated life and how they lived and related to the land and honoured life, and also how they measured evolution of the clans, of the people, how they discussed and shared where are we at and where are we going. And so the movement, when we look at the evolution of humanity now, is always going to be part of it. How we come together and decide, what are we going to create? What are we going to create as a species? How we come together and decide who we are together, not individually. I'm not worried about what I need. I'm worried about our species, but where we're headed, where we want to grow, where we want to go. So one of the things in the movement that I share is that internal connection to your spirit. What is that? For me, I saw it very clearly when I went to the Sufi movement, and I felt it, and it was permanent. There was no denying that it was something I could just turn on and off. It was a true seeing that there was this light inside that was constantly being nurtured every time I danced and every time I connected to it. And the only thing stopping me from doing that was my mind or my thoughts that I wasn't connected. And so our next thing that we can do in the workshops that I share is to really just say, anytime those thoughts come in that I can't connect to my internal spirit or my higher self or my divine, it's just a story. It's just a story. That's very different to when I started in the 90s with this movement thing, where we were having these experiences. We had our stories back then that somehow it was something that we needed to discuss. Why aren't we permanently connected? But what's changed, and what I'm happy to see has changed, is that I don't need to share that in workshops anymore. All I need to do now is just remind people that it's there. It's just up to you to turn your focus onto it, your awareness onto it. That's how much our collective as a species has grown since the 90s to 2023. We've actually got this chance now just to go inside and go, oh, there it is. It was there all this time. I've just been distracted. And that's very different from when I was doing the collective dance workshops in the 90s. And then once that connection is acknowledged, what's the next? The question becomes, for you individually and for us as a species, as a collective, what do we want for our human species? I hear a lot of negative talk. The things that you don't hear advertised so much is the envisioning of the potential of humanity to come together and be amazing. And that's what the humanists had in the 60s when they started. They literally were doing movement workshops or transformational work, and they'd hold hands in circles and they'd all envision this future of humanity. And we're that future that they envisioned. So we are now responsible for carrying that vision forward. And that's an important acknowledgement that I have for us. We can do it if we focus on that, if we want it. It's a choice, and it always will be. So you don't have to focus on it. You can fill your consciousness with anything. For me, in the movement, anytime I tap into my heart center and feel what's that possibility for humanity, it's very lovely. It's very quiet. It's very peaceful. Maybe that's boring for people, but it's not that complicated. I think people make it really complicated. And the evolution of the species has often not been successful because we made things complicated. Whenever I connect to the heart within, it's actually quite easy. And maybe I can say that and only because I've had times where things have been the opposite, which I'm going to talk in the next video because it's about balance. But if you've ever experienced where you're making things really hard in your life and you're wondering, why is it always so hard? That's because you're making it hard. And I know that that's easy for me to say, but it's because I've lived it. So evolution of consciousness through movement can be very, very simple. It can be just taking the time to feel that heart center and allowing a stillness or a movement to come. All of the humanist movement traditions usually end up doing some process that includes that, but they can be multidimensional and give you so many other tools. When we work with Dance with Angela, we're essentially just connecting to the heart center and allowing you to see what's there, because it will be unique to you. And together, when we do the workshops together, we just allow the sharing to happen organically from your spiritual connection to the others in the group, and between you and your spiritual connection to see whatever evolves as a possibility for you to explore and for you to recognize that you have evolved, because some of us struggle with even looking at ourselves through that lens. And it's important to acknowledge, yeah, you're different. You're different to what was happening in the 90s, and you're different to what happened yesterday, and you're different to who you were when you were a child. And where are you today? What's going on internally? And that's the gift of movement. It allows you to feel whatever's going on inside without necessarily having to be expressing that movement outside as well. So there's some of the sharings I've got on the evolution of consciousness through movement. There's more to share on that. I'm just doing some introductory videos about the 4 teachings that I have in the Body of Love and the Energy Body of Self-Acceptance program. So if you want to find out more about the classes, I'll put that in the description below. And I look forward to the next video, which is going to be on balance and how dance and movement connects us to balance, and how love is about balance.